Jessica Lemie. I'm the Hughes County State's Attorney and a member of the CLE committee. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few things, and so you'll know how to participate in today's event. First thing is if you or a lawyer, law student that you know has any drug or alcohol problems or is struggling with depression or anxiety, Lawyers and Concern for Lawyers is a confidential and independent resource for South Dakota lawyers, law students, and their families. Your referral or visit with LCL is strictly confidential and privileged. You can call Becky Porter for more information at 605-391-5191. Becky is an LCL member, and your communications with her are likewise confidential and privileged. And additionally, the South Dakota State Bar members and their families also have access to the Sand Creek Member Assistance Program, which includes 24/7 hotline. And to reach a trained professional at any hour for a confidential discussion and assessment, you can call Sand Creek at 1-888-243-5744. And I believe that both of those phone numbers will be added to the chat feature as well. Today's presentation will last approximately 1 hour. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to the presenter by typing your questions into the chat feature of Zoom. And you can send your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect those and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I want to say thank you to the State Bar of South Dakota, the CLE Committee, and the USD Center for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Maltreatment for their support of today's program. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Julie Johnson is an attorney from near Aberdeen. She's the product of a 3-generation family business and has owned several small businesses along the way. When she graduated from USD Law, she returned to Aberdeen to practice for about 7 years. She's also served as the South Dakota Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Revenue, and as an administrative law judge and the president and CEO of the Industry and Commerce Association of South Dakota, now State Chamber. She eventually returned home to run its growth initiative called Absolutely Aberdeen and Prairie Vision. Julie has taught business law and related courses in the South Dakota higher education system. She's been an active member of several state bar committees over the years, including currently serving on the in-house counsel, administrative law, and workers' compensation committees. In all those years, she has had a role as the South Dakota Legislature, wearing some form of lobbyist badge. She is perhaps the longest standing woman lawyer lobbyist at the South Dakota Legislature. Julie monitors economic development, housing, workforce, HR, employment law, tax, regulatory, and business issues of the legislature every year. And with that, I would like to introduce Julie Johnson.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and I don't know who writes those things, but I appreciate the introduction. Glad to be with you today, and we are here in the beautiful State Bar of South Dakota offices in downtown Pierre, and privileged to be there. I had to be at a legislative hearing this morning, so they allowed me to come over. Thank you to them. So if I can get my computer to work, there we go. What we'll talk about, I'll give you a good disclaimer. We'll talk about some dates that you'll all want to be aware of. Then we'll talk about what we should begin with the end in mind. I'll share a few legislative trends with you, some budget issues that some of you may be interested in, some economic development issues that may present opportunities for you and your clients, some economic development tools you may want to know about. We'll look at a few workforce issues, some HR and employment law issues, and some upcoming ballot measures. And I'm happy to take your questions along the way. If I miss them in the chat, feel free to interrupt me. Let's see if I can get this to advance. There we go. So bear in mind, I do not represent the State Bar Association at the legislature. I have a lot of different lobbying clients, all of which combine to present kind of an interesting vantage point when the session is over every year. The State Bar has a very competent lobbying and legal team at the legislature, and I'm privileged to be among them during their service at the Capitol every year. So my viewpoint is more inside the workplace, what those of us that interact with various businesses, economic development efforts, community efforts, et cetera, need to know. And we actually came to doing this because some of us on the in-house council committee started comparing notes at session and after session and decided we probably needed to put together a little combination package, and that's what this is. There may be a lot of other issues that you run into, and you'll notice also there are a few issues on which I am not an expert. There are a few issues I become an expert on, but feel free to inject if I have screwed it up or if there is a better expert along the way. So how I slice and dice the issues may not be the same way that you do, and please forgive me for that. sdlegislature.gov is the website. It's not the best website in America, but it is the website that we used for all of this. An admonition, it really doesn't Google search very well, and it's really not set up for that, but you can reach out to some of us that spend 24/7 there and we can find what you're looking for. Dates are really important this year. May 23rd is the last day to register to vote in order to vote in the June 7 primary. So that's really coming up. There are some of your clients may really want to participate in this particular primary election on June 7 because of some things I have on the next slide. So June 7, be sure and have it on your calendar if you don't already, or be sure you get to vote before June 7. On November 8th, of course, is the general election. And then we're back at the legislative stuff one more time with feeling on December 6th, when the governor presents the budget address, and then session starts all over again on January 9th. So in no time at all, we'll be back there. And in 2023, they are using 38 legislative days. Let's see if I get this to advance. There we go. So why am I emphasizing June 7? Begin with the end in mind. There are many city and school elections in all over South Dakota that will be held on June 7. Those are definitive. Those don't wait until November. The June 7 primary also contains many primary elections, especially for the House and Senate, South Dakota House and Senate, that will be determined completely on June 7th, that will not wait until November. This is not a partisan comment, but it is a very interesting phenomenon this year. Many races for the legislature particularly will be decided on June 7th, not on November. So be sure your clients know that, especially those that encourage voter participation. They'll want to know how sensitive this one is this year. And there is a constitutional amendment on the primary ballot this year, Amendment C. I do not want to impose my personal opinion on you, nor do my clients have a personal opinion about it. But Amendment C is a constitutional amendment on the June 7 primary, and we never have constitutional amendments on primary ballots. So if you can encourage you and your clients to pay attention to those items, you will notice that it is worth showing up for to vote either absentee or vote on June 7. Notice also that nearly all legislative districts have new boundaries due to the reapportionment that the legislature does every 10 years. You may be in new districts, your clients may be in new districts. Help them find those district boundaries. Your county auditor can help you with that, or on the state's website, there is a very rich website that shows legislative district boundaries. So reach out, be sure you figured that out by the time you try to engage on June 7th. Absentee voting is open now. You can vote absentee now, but remember the clock will tick for voter registration. May 23rd at 5 o'clock is the last day to register to vote. And your county auditors tend to be very helpful with that kind of thing. So don't forget the importance of voting on June 7. Now, if I can get these to go to the next slide, there we go. Legislative trends. There was an absolute avalanche of bills and joint resolutions, which are ways to get things to the ballot, on the legislature's plate in January, February, and part of March. 558 such bills and joint resolutions. Only 6 of those were joint resolutions. So the legislature had a lot of work to do, and people like you and I have a lot of sorting out to do now that they went home, to try to figure out what they passed, what they didn't pass, what our clients need to know, etc. It was close to a record number of bills. The American Rescue Plan, of course, gave the state $1.25 billion to figure out how to allocate. The appropriators and the entire legislature spent a lot of energy on how to allocate those. I'll show you a few that our profession will care about before we leave this presentation. Notice also the state's economy had extra revenues, probably in large measure to the fact that we tax internet sales, and the pandemic expenditures probably skewed some of that. We'll see how we end up in the next fiscal year. Marijuana and cannabis were major topics. There were 47 bills on those 2 topics. Recreational marijuana did not pass. Medical marijuana was cleaned up. There were some things procedurally that needed to be cleaned up, even though the voters voted for medical marijuana on the last ballot. Lots of new legislative staff, including lots of new lawyers who work for the legislature. And that is challenging, in my opinion, especially having worked there for so long. It's a real challenge to get them up to speed and then to keep them on the payroll. There's a bit of a revolving door going on over there. That's sorry for those of you who had to listen to that. There were also some fairly major issues around who had authority to spend the federal funds. In the end, most of that was resolved and they went home. I'll get to the next slide. There we go. So a few budget issues that you and your clients may want to know about. There were no tax increases. There was one fee that was repealed, and that has to do with gun permits. This was a promise the governor made in her State of the State address. And in fact, gun permits fees no longer exist. The legislature then figured out a way to pay for that and to return those dollars to the Secretary of State's office and the counties that participate in the gun permitting process. There was a momentary consideration of a repeal of corporate filing fees, which would have included nonprofits. That went away. So those still exist, and those are so small we can't complain anyway, in my opinion. There's a small reduction in property taxes, given what the state was able to allocate for the state aid to education formula. There may be some cities or counties or townships that need some small increases, but those are limited as well. For those of us who try to help our clients with human resource issues, etc., the state did set its targeted teacher salary at $55,756.31 to be precise. And that's a process the state engages in once we went through the teacher salary increase process a few years ago. Also, for those of you who help your clients look out for your competitive environment for your staff, the state employees, as well as K-12 education and Medicaid providers, received a 6% increase, and that is probably a record. It may not be sustainable into the future, just so you know that, but that's the level they're at. The Reemployment Assistance Fund, some of us know it as the Unemployment Insurance Fund, is healthy, so there didn't need to be any tweaks there. There are some child care grants the legislature, or the Department of Social Services was able to make, and there may be some more coming due to some federal funding called Child Care Stabilization Grants. Teen Court was funded. There was a great team effort on that count, and I can't take any of the credit for that, as were the VOCA funds. So for those of us that navigate that universe, those were successful as well. There were many corrections issues. The governor has suggested that there be some additional construction in the corrections world. She's hired a new corrections secretary. From all of that, then the legislature created an incarceration construction fund. There's also a juvenile justice study going on because of the issues that have been raised recently, including from the schools. And counties also brought the subject of needing regional jails or needing help in meeting their jail needs throughout their regions. So from those last three topics, the legislature on Monday created 3 big summer studies on those 3 topics. And some of you may want to engage in those. I know I have clients who will be engaged in them also. Now, oops. All right, economic development issues. Some of your clients may want to get plugged into some of these. Broadband, the state is continuing its very significant investment in broadband infrastructure throughout the state. Many of you are well positioned to take advantage of that. And of course, we know the federal government is also making many key investments in broadband. This is the time to be sure you're included. Data centers, the Governor's Office of Economic Development agreed with the industry that they will work on ways to incentivize data centers where they are viable and where they are well positioned around the state. If your clients are interested at all in the cybersecurity investment, the state made a very significant cybersecurity investment through Dakota State University and in Sioux Falls. You may want to get a seat at that table. I am not an expert in this, so I want to disclaim that completely. But I think it's very exciting for the future that South Dakota is going to play such a role, and our clients may need to get plugged in there. Accelerated nursing received some good investments through all through South Dakota State University's nursing program, but at Black Hills State in Rapid City and at Northern State University in Aberdeen. There's a big biomed investment through the Discovery District and USD in Sioux Falls. And then of course, the carbon capture pipeline has filed an application with the Public Utilities Commission, where that will need to be reviewed and or approved over about a year-long process. But the legislature put in some safety and taxation legislation. So that area is cleaned up. Okay, economic development tools. There's a few smaller issues, but can be really big ones for our clients when the time comes. The Governor's Office of Economic Development updated the language that relates to federal funds involved in the Small Business Credit Initiative. The state got more money through COVID relief, and that language was updated. We are awaiting some marketing from the state about additional funds being available for small business credit. That's House Bill 1051. There was a significant bill passed, Senate Bill 135, regarding liability in the agritourism business. You have clients in that world, you'll definitely want to read Senate Bill 135. If you are helping your community or a business with motorized foot scooters, House Bill 1084 clarifies that communities can make ordinances about where motorized foot scooters can be in their communities, so that process may be engaged in locally. All 6 vaccine bills died, and there are a lot of perspectives on that. I won't go too far down that rabbit hole. Quiet zones, if you're helping your community with development in and around your rail lines, you too may be looking for the installation of additional technology in and around those rail crossings where they're quieter and they don't have to do all those rail whistles every time. Aberdeen happens to have, I think, the only one in South Dakota. So I ended up having to follow this completely. The Department of Transportation did find money for those, and there'll be a process through the State Rail Board if communities want to take advantage of the quiet zone technology on their rail lines. Zebra mussels, there was no action on that. That's a problem on many lakes. There are several lakes across South Dakota that are now infested with the aquatic invasive species known as the zebra mussel. Ag land valuation, much discussion about ag land valuations. There will be a summer study on this. Some of you may have clients who want to engage in that. Electric vehicles, you do no longer have to be a utility provider to be a place where you can plug in your electric vehicle, like at your hotel or your campground or whatever. So that was clarified in Senate Bill 80. A small cleanup was made regarding public information and public meetings in House Bill 1087 that relates to things like security and cybersecurity plans that don't need to be disclosed in public meetings if you're bringing a project to a local government. There's a camping immunity bill that passed, House Bill 1176. A nice cleanup regarding foreign LLCs converting to domestic LLCs in House Bill 1060. And then if you have clients that are in the self-service storage business, that area of the law was modernized and updated in House Bill 1289. A few workforce issues presenting lots of opportunities. I'm not going to go into these in great detail, but 3 of the technical colleges got strategic investments in advanced manufacturing, ag and diesel power, health sciences, and of course, accelerated nursing, as we've talked about. So for those of you who are working in the economic development sphere or your community's workforce environment, you'll want to know that and how to plug into that. Also, if you are helping at all in your community's marketing efforts, tourism or economic development marketing or workforce marketing, the Department of Tourism was allocated $35 million for visitor marketing and workforce marketing that is targeted to the visitor industry and hospitality jobs. Those dollars will be spent over the period of 4 years because they're federal funds, and that's what the federal funds allow. And we're told that there may be a South Dakota fishing campaign as one of the pieces of that. There may be some opportunities for your local, they call them destination marketing organizations, maybe your CVB, maybe your development corp, maybe your chamber, that could apply to do that with the state. We also know that there's a pre-kindergarten and childcare studies, separate studies that are coming from the state, and we don't know a lot more about those. And there's a workforce study coming anytime now from the Department of Labor and Regulation. A few other HR or employment law issues. Juneteenth, June 19th, is both officially a federal and a state holiday due to some cleanup legislation the state did pass. So June 19th is a holiday. There's no reemployment assistance tax increases. We also know that is unemployment insurance. The state did help the department with a big new investment in a new reemployment assistance computer system, which is badly needed. There's no big workers' comp bills this year. As I mentioned, all 6 vaccine bills died. We already talked about teacher salaries. Then Common Paymaster, which some of your clients may be interested in. House Bill 1175 did pass and is now becoming law. Now, delivery facilitation contractors. That is not a phrase that was in most of our vocabularies before this legislative session, but this would be those businesses like Uber and DoorDash, et cetera, where there's a lot of people in the business of helping deliver things to people. Read House Bill 1118. It is an independent contractor definition for that industry sector. So it's now specific to South Dakota. This is how we define those, and this is how we understand someone that's an independent contractor in that business. The business of women's names was cleaned up in House Bill 1268, fixed a little thing that happened a few years ago, and I'm thankful for that. Just a note to self. A small change in expungements of records made in Senate Bill 83. And we're still watching all of the issues in and around marijuana and the workforce. Most of that will be decided if we ever pass recreational marijuana. Special session. So the legislature will go into special session, or I'm sorry, the Senate will go into special session on June 21 and 22 regarding the possible impeachment of the Attorney General. I try to stay out of that, but be aware there'll be a lot of people in Pierre on that issue those days. Ballot measures. There are 2 ballot measures currently filed at the Secretary of State's office regarding Medicaid expansion. Which one will be emphasized, I do not know at this point, but you probably have clients who may or may not have a stake in the outcome of that ballot measure. So you'll want to pay attention to that. I'm sure this will be clarified more as we get closer to the November general election. Those will be on the November ballot. Recreational marijuana did file signatures before the May deadline. It's several pages of legal language, including some exceptions. If you and your clients care about how that reads, be sure and go on to the Secretary of State's website and check out that language. We'll have to be careful about that language, I'm sure, no matter what side of that issue you're on. As I understand it, the signatures are being checked now at the Secretary of State's office to determine whether they have enough to appear on the ballot. So the ones I've just talked about are on the November ballot, but don't forget, there is a constitutional amendment C on the June 7th ballot, and that has to do with an increased vote requirement. If a ballot measure is going to cost 10 million or more in the first 5 years after passage, then it requires a 60% vote requirement. That's what Amendment C does. And I will spare any other legal opinions or policy positions on that. So this is all my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me, and would be happy to answer any questions. I haven't followed the chat, so maybe one of you can help me with questions that are hanging out there in the chat. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. What kind of questions can I answer?
There are no questions in the chat, but I would just ask Julie, was there anything that came as a surprise this legislative session that you haven't covered? Or a piece of legislation that was a little out of left field that we just didn't see coming?
To me, the biggest surprise was the disagreement about who had authority to spend federal funds. Because that had been decided law to me a long time ago, but eventually that was worked out. I think that was my biggest surprise, but I also watched that part of the legislative process a little more than the average bear does. Feel free to ask any other questions.
Julie, I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about like a summer study program or committee? Is there any structure to how they do it, or what their parameters are, or anything like that?
I'm sorry, there was a lot of background noise. Did you ask about summer studies?
Yes. Is there a structure of how they meet and progress or come up with any recommendations?
Yes and no. Really depends on who's on the committee. Depends on who shows up and provides information. to the members of the committee. Each one takes on its own different personality. When they get to the end, there is a process by which they make recommendations to the legislature's executive board on legislation that goes forward, if any. So they all have a little bit different personality, depending on the issues, depending on who shows up, depending on who's able to volunteer from the legislature to serve on them, who chairs them. So yeah, feel free to call me if you want to talk through something I might know specifically for you. Did that help, Amanda? Any other
She
questions?
said thanks in the chat.
Very good. Any other questions or comments, concerns that you might have?
There is a question that was just placed in the chat. Was Senate Bill 80 solely for allowing businesses to offer free charging for electric vehicles, or was there a process for collecting money for charging electric vehicles? That came from Craig Evenson.
As I don't have Senate Bill 80 pulled up in front of me, but it was designed to be sure that anybody who is offering that service is not regulated as a utility. Previous to that bill, you had to be a regulated utility to sell power. So they carved that out of the utility definitions. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns anyone might have? I'm not seeing the chat, so I will keep my contact information up there. Feel free to reach out to me if I confused you, if I screwed it up, or you need additional information. All are legal. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you.